To the Council of the Whole Committee, and I'm chairing it today under Public Safety. Jean, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Calling the roll, Ms. Brown? Ms. Stevens?
Present.
Ms. Simon? Ms. Simon is absent at the moment. Ms. Baker?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mr. Tuma?
Here.
Mr. Gallagher? Mr. Schron? Ms. Conwell? Ms. Conwell is absent at the moment. Mr. Jones? Mr. Jones is absent at the moment. Council President Brady? You have a quorum.
Ladies and gentlemen, some ground rules here I think would be helpful. Under public comment, which we'll have next, there'll be 3 minutes as usual. That's for anybody for or against this legislation. We will then invite the framers, Eugene Kramer and Bruce Akers, who are present, before we have our presenters and supporters of this legislation. But Mayor Akers and Eugene Kramer are present. All framers that are alive were contacted. Judy Rawson, Mayor, former Mayor Shaker Heights, responded she is not in favor of this, and her response is in the record for anybody to see. What we have here is legislation that I think I should tell the story on how we got here first. Is the week before the federal marshal's report came out, the rumor was that it was bad. It was very bad. And it was going to name names and take no prisoners. It was supposed to come out on a Monday. I called the federal marshal on a Thursday, I believe it was. Don't hold me to that. And I talked to him and I said, I hear it's bad. I don't want to know what's in it. But I do want to know one thing. How do we fix this? And he said, the only way you're going to fix this is electing your sheriff. That was over 7 months ago. So for anybody that wants to say this was a knee-jerk reaction, it's a 7-month knee-jerk reaction. So I decided I'll call the people that work with the sheriff. If I'm a social event and I see somebody that deals with the sheriff, what do you think? I called the former and present sheriffs. What do you think? I didn't get one person telling me it was a bad idea. I didn't get one person telling me it was a gray area. Not one. I don't pretend to be a lawman because I'm not. When I was on city council and I had a problem with the fire department, I went to the fire chief. When I had an issue with the police, I went to the police chief. And I relied on those people to be the experts in their chosen area. So I think what's important is that we hear from people that are experts in this chosen area. Now, this isn't to gloss over the problems of the past. They were numerous. They're in the record book, and they were bad. But I'm wondering if we did the right thing in certain areas. And this is an open discussion without any pretense of we're going to do this or we're going to do that. It will be a debate. We may not do anything, but I think we owe it to the citizens of Cuyahoga County, and especially those that vote, to maybe let them decide, because weren't they the ones that we let decide to formulate this government? Maybe they're the ones that need to decide down the road that they want to change this form of government. And maybe this is a step now, or maybe it's not a step now. So I ask my colleagues to keep an open mind. We have other legislation that's been submitted. I'm under the impression there may be more. But I'll read a timeline as to what we have to do. So if you would stay with me on that, we will have further discussion about the elected sheriff as a charter amendment, as well as Mr. Tuma's proposed charter amendment on July 11th. So we'll continue this discussion on July 11th with Mr. Tuma's proposal and any others that may come up. Today's exclusive discussion will be on Mr. Brady and myself's proposal. The final decision must be made by August 6th, and we will be meeting on September 6th. Oh, September 6th is the filing deadline, but we have a drop dead date of August 6th. If by chance nothing goes on the ballot, we don't have anything to worry about. If by chance both have support to go to the ballot, there was a question as to, well, who wins? The one that gets the most votes. It's a democratic way. So let me go over what my legislation with Mr. Brady addresses, as actually Mr. Toomas does also in some of these, other than going to the ballot. Requirements for the sheriff will be an associate's degree in law enforcement or criminal justice, or at least a bachelor's degree in any field. Must obtain one or more certifications from nationally recognized associations for jail corrections within 1 year of taking office. Annual compensation will be $130,000 and can be increased by the council. Vacancies are filled provided in accordance with the Ohio Revised Code. If there is a ballot issue that is approved in November, the primary election to elect a sheriff will be held March 10th, 2020. That primary date is subject to change by the Ohio General Assembly. And the general election will be held on Tuesday, November 3rd, 2020. The filing deadline for candidates to be March 10th, 2020. Ballot is, the 2020 ballot is December 11, 2019. We will have presenters in support of this legislation. The Honorable John Russo, Common Pleas Court Administrative Judge, the Honorable Michael O'Malley, County Prosecutor, former Sheriff Bob Reed, Bob Cornwell, and Muskegon County Sheriff Matthew Lutz, and Mr. Cornwell is from the Buckeye State Sheriff's Association, Mark Stanton, who is the Cuyahoga County Public Defender, and presenters other than Judge Russo will be answering questions. Because of judicial restrictions, Judge Russo cannot answer questions regarding this. Are there any concerns or questions from the committee? Okay. Jean, could you read the legislation?
Mr. Chair, is it your preference? We have 3 persons who wish to address council for public comment. Did you want to take that?
Okay, let's do that. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead.
Oh, that's okay.
You will have whomever you are. You have 3 minutes, and please approach. Name?
Okay, the first speaker is Linda Mayer.
Is this live? Yes. I'm Linda Mayer, along with League of Women Voters co-presidents Audrey Morris and Catherine LaCroix and past President Marcia Goldberg. And I would like to enlarge a bit on our formal statement, which we made on June 14th. The 3 main arguments that we hear most often for in favor of electing the sheriff really do not hold water in a county like ours with our history and our issues. So I'll take all 3 of them, and if I run out of time, one of my colleagues will complete. The first argument that we hear is voters ought to be able to choose their sheriff. That's very intuitive. And it might even be true if only elections were competitive and if qualifications were strict. But in a strongly Democratic or Republican county, that's most of the counties in Ohio are one or the other, that party's county committee endorses a candidate who then always wins that party's primary. The other party, regrettably, nearly always fields either a weak candidate or no candidate at all. It's really rare that general election voters have much say in the choice of their sheriff. I should also add that it's equally rare in such a county for voters to retire a party-endorsed sheriff from office. Now, another argument that we hear a lot is that sheriffs should be independent of other offices and other departments because they have the power to investigate. Now, this may also be true, even though infrequent, in a traditional county with 11 independently elected countywide officials, but it's not true in this charter system. Our charter established multiple safeguards, empowered to find and to deal with cases of corruption or mismanagement when they occur. And they will always occur at some point. We're never pure. So the council can investigate the executive branch. The executive can investigate the council. The inspector general and the auditor, independent auditor, and the prosecutor, they can investigate anybody. And the Personnel Review Commission can enforce a fair merit employment system across the board. The investigative tools built into our charter are ample, and several have already worked very well, while others admittedly could still be more utilized. But an additional sheriff's investigative function, I think, would be quite redundant here. And perhaps Catherine LaCroix could complete our statement.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Catherine LaCroix.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Catherine LaCroix, the incoming co-president of the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland. So the third argument we heard is that an independently elected sheriff could fix the current jail problems by his or herself without being under the thumb of the county executive. Again, I think this may be the main idea behind the proposal currently before you, that we need someone who can fix this. And yes, a conscientious and capable independent sheriff could have prevented the problems or dealt with them early. But so could conscientious and independent and capable administrators in our unified executive branch. That they didn't has nothing to do with structure. It depends more on the leaders who hold these offices than it does on the structure of the offices themselves. One thing, though, is entirely a matter of structure, and that is that an appointed sheriff can be replaced at any time by executive action if not conscientious and capable, while an elected sheriff remains in office until the next countywide elections, regardless. Only the voters could theoretically remove and replace an elected sheriff at a designated time, namely an election, but we've seen how uncompetitive these elections usually are. Our prior sheriffs had a history of perpetual re-election despite years of patronage abuse and corruption. Electing the sheriff is no way to ensure that problems at the jail will not reemerge. It probably instead would bring back a set of problems we thought we had put behind us. So we truly understand the frustration underlying the proposal to elect the sheriff, and we understand the concept that in general, for other counties, this might be something worth considering, but for the reason we have identified, we think it's not the answer here. We notice that this evening's regular council agenda contains an alternative resolution that will likely come before this committee of the whole very soon, and the League of Women Voters Greater Cleveland hopes to look at that proposal, and we strongly hope that it proposes a more constructive way to fix the problems with our sheriff. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the final speaker for this public comment period is Daniel Leffler.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Leffler from the Ohio Patrolmen's Benevolent Association. I'm here on behalf of our nearly 1,000 members within the Sheriff's Office to speak in favor of the resolution. I can only speak on behalf of our employees and what we deal with and go through on a daily basis. I can tell you that the employees are frustrated. They're disheartened and their morale is at an all-time low. And this isn't just related to the corrections issues. The deputies as well have seen understaffing, overworked with regard to overtime and scheduling, lack of responsiveness within the sheriff's office and the perimeter desk. There are a multitude of issues that have occurred both on the corrections side, deputy side, and the protective services division. And what would typically happen is that if we noticed a problem or an issue and we had to address that, in any of the other counties, you would simply call the sheriff, schedule a meeting, sit down and talk about, okay, what is the problem? Let's identify the problem, see if we can resolve it. If we can, if not, the sheriff will make a decision, and as the union representative, we'll make a decision to either grieve and move on, or we accept that decision as it is. That does not occur in Cuyahoga County. There are 0 times that I can pick up the phone and call the sheriff, Pinckney currently, or the prior sheriff, and say, these are the issues that we're having, how do we address these? Because there are multiple layers of bureaucracy that you have to go through. If it's let's say it's a payroll issue, that has to go to one division. If it's a injury on duty issue, that goes to a different division. Nobody ultimately within the sheriff's office makes a final decision, and then we decide where to go from there. In theory, I guess that's the way that it should work. I'm telling you, in practicality, it does not work that way. We don't always agree with the sheriff. I'm sure all of these sheriffs will tell you that we frequently disagree. At least they make a decision, and then we can evaluate where we go from there. The last point that I would indicate is that nobody is going to fix the problems within the jail by themselves. We've been, both the union and the county and the sheriff's office have been meeting on a weekly basis to try and address the issues. But again, this is not just a corrections issue. This is a problem that goes throughout the sheriff's office from all the divisions. We're short-staffed on both the deputy side, the corrections side. The sheriff is not in charge of hiring, and we've made suggestions as to how to improve that or how to change that. But again, the sheriff doesn't have the ability to make that final determination. It has to go through some other multi-layer bureaucracy in order to finally get that decision made. So I'm out of time. I appreciate your time, and on behalf of the union, we're in favor of the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone further? Jean, could you read that, please?
Yes, I will. Thank you. Resolution number 2019-0134, providing for the submission to the electors of the County of Cuyahoga an amendment to repeal Section 5.08 and enact Article 16 of the County Charter, providing for the election of the sheriff, including the powers, duties, qualifications, and compensation of the office.
Thank you. Judge Russo, as I stated earlier, Judge Russo has a trial to get to, plus he has an injury to take care of, and he will not be answering questions. All the other presenters will. Thank you, Judge, for being here.
All right, thank you, and good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for your public service. I'm here speaking on behalf of the General Division as their administrative judge for almost 6 years now. And as the presiding judge, I'm also here speaking on behalf of the Juvenile Court Division as well as the Domestic Relations Court Division. As noted by Councilman Gallagher, I do have some judicial ethics and concerns that I need to be aware of in my statement. I have provided a typed statement for each of you, but I do want to read it onto the record. And again, I am prohibited by my ethics to take or answer questions at this time. But I stand here because the issue before you is important to us as the judiciary. And so I'll read my statement then. Dear Council President and members of County Council, I understand that County Council is considering whether to include an amendment on the ballot to change the county charter to provide for an elected sheriff. On behalf of the General, Juvenile, and Domestic Relations Divisions of the Common Pleas Court, please accept these comments and this letter as a recommendation to County Council to vote in favor of such a measure. The court interacts closely with the sheriff and the sheriff's department and staff. Over the past number of years, the court has enjoyed a good and respectful relationship with Sheriff Frank Bova and Sheriff Cliff Pinkney and the staff in the Sheriff's Department. I also add Sheriff Reed because as the administrative judge, I had time with him as well when he was the appointed sheriff. However, the current structure of government in Cuyahoga County that requires an appointed county sheriff negatively impacts the effective administration of justice. The sheriff is not only responsible for the operations of the sheriff's department and the county jail, but is also accountable for the security in the courthouse and considered the #1 law enforcement official in the county. As a result, the position impacts all persons who come before the general, juvenile, and domestic relation divisions of the Court of Common Pleas, or who conduct their business in these courts each day. An elective sheriff would be in a position to make decisions regarding the sheriff's department without the need for additional meetings or discussions with officials outside of their department. This structure of government will resolve issues more efficiently and will lead to greater accountability by the sheriff to the citizens of Cuyahoga County. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to speak at this important time and important subject, and I respectfully recommend that you ask the voters of Cuyahoga County to amend the county charter to provide for an independently elected county sheriff. And I thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Judge. And again, for the members that might not have been here, there are letters of support and one of non-support in your packet. What we did do, again, we tried to contact the framers of the charter, Mayor Akers and Mr. Kramer have been kind enough to show up here. I've had contact with Judy Ross and the former Mayor Shaker Heights. And my question is simple. How did we get here? How was the decision made? Who made the decision? Who'd you talk to? I couldn't find anything, and this was an odd situation because they were a citizens group, so they weren't bound to have minutes or anything like that. So I rely on their memories or notes that they might have taken at the time to help us where we're at right now. So Mr. Kramer and Mr. Akers, if you could approach, please. Again, thank you both for being here, and any information you can give us in that narrow area would be helpful.
Okay. Well, let me say first of all that as a citizen of Cuyahoga County, I think of the jail situation that gave rise to this is not fixed by January 2021. We might as well give up on the idea of being able to govern ourselves. I think that the county charter, as Linda Mayor has pointed out, contains all the power and authority that's necessary to deal with the jail situation.
Okay, sir, I want to stay, and I appreciate that, but I'd like to say narrowly, how did we get here? Could you help me?
Get here? Well, first of all, the citizens of Cuyahoga County have voted twice to eliminate the elected office of sheriff. In 1935, the first Cuyahoga County proposed charter was put before the voters of the county. That was a charter that would have established what has been a common theme throughout any number of county charter proposals. And I've been involved in quite a few of them in Ohio and in quite a number of counties. And there are common themes that you separate the executive and legislative functions in the county. You don't have the county commissioners having those same functions. In order to provide clear lines of authority and accountability, you elect policymaking officials and appoint those who carry out the policies, who are administrative officers. And that is why most of the proposals that have ever come before the voters in Cuyahoga County. And I say in the very first one, there would have been an appointed chief executive officer, if you will, of the county. And the other elected offices would have been eliminated and replaced by appointed officers. The people of the county did vote for that charter. Unfortunately, because of what I think was a very misguided Ohio Supreme Court decision, that charter did not go into effect. The very first charter that I ever was involved in.
But could you, and we have a time situation here, the sheriff, how did we get to an appointed sheriff?
Because of those principles, the sheriff is an administrative officer, not a policy-making officer, and therefore should be subject to appointment and under the jurisdiction of the appointed, in this case, the elected county executive and the county council. And that's why I started my statement by saying I think there's adequate authority, and as Linda's pointed out, under the existing charter to deal with these situations. And one common thing that has come through most of the charter efforts I've been involved with has been the Buckeye Sheriff's Association coming up and insisting that the sheriff must be
this isn't a
elected.
debate. You're here as a courtesy to us. The sheriff, how did we get here? Who was in the room?
I'm telling you
Who
why
did you talk to?
is provision, because of the desire to have accountability, clear lines of authority, and have all of the administrative officers appointed and answerable to the county executive and the county council. And I think it's laudable to want to add additional qualifications for the position, but the county council certainly can notify the executive that we won't confirm anybody who doesn't have the kinds of qualifications you want. There's no need to amend the charter to do that. And another reason why in the provisions
Well, I don't, and again, we're not debating the why. How did we get here?
because when I wrote the original draft of the charter,
Okay.
I wrote it in that fashion as is very common in most charters. And no municipal charter provides for the election of a police chief. We don't elect the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We don't elect the head of the Ohio Highway Patrol. The county sheriff being elected is an outlier in government. And it's similar to the provision why we have civilian control of the military. You want
Okay.
civilian
We're
control
getting-
of
we're getting
the
far
police
afield.
function as well.
I appreciate that, and I think we do understand it. But I'd like to know what expert, if any, and this is something I can't get answered, I don't know why, who did we rely on as an expert as to not elect a sheriff? Was it you, maybe? I don't know.
Well, I've been involved in county government reform for 50 years.
Okay.
Yes, I probably have more experience in it than anybody else in the state of Ohio. And I've examined what is going on around the country.
Okay.
And we had, when we were framing the charter, the experience of 2 recent elected county sheriffs going to prison. We saw no reason why the elected county sheriff is necessarily going to do a better job than an appointed county sheriff.
Okay.
And why? And so it is an outlier. It is different from all other levels of government. And we saw no reason. And there was not, to my recollection, a single objection during any of our meetings and deliberations to the provision in the charter for having an appointed county sheriff.
Okay. That actually answers my question. Thank you. Mayor, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. As you know, the counties are a creature of the state unless they have their own charter. And only Summit and now Cuyahoga have that. All of the offices that are part of the county that they do not have their own charter are elected. We who are involved in developing the county charter realize that the election of a charter, of a office holder, didn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to have a better control or a better response by the officer. I respectfully submit to you that prior to this charter being formed and adopted, we, the voters of the county, elected 11 office holders, 3 commissioners, and I have to read this because I remember all of them: sheriff, engineer, prosecutor, clerk of courts, treasurer, auditor, recorder, and coroner. And the feeling was to create a check and balance form of government, strong executive, strong council. You have the federal, president, Congress, you have the state, legislature, and governor, you have them in city halls, mayors, and city council. We didn't have it at the county level. Mm-hmm. And the feeling of a group of us was, let's get a check and balance in there. Okay. And the idea being having a strong executive who would then, he or she would then appoint these various office holders to be confirmed and ratified by you. Okay. And then for the council to hold the county executive responsible for the work that those appointees are charged with. And when they are not doing the job right, for you as council to hold that executive responsible. That's the background. And we feel very strongly, I say we, those of us who are involved in the creation of this charter, mm-hmm. that this is a step backward. The problem now, the current problem now we have in the sheriff's office is not because of the structure. The current problem now is because there was not a strong appointee, and then when issues started to evolve, the jail, whatnot, action wasn't taken at the executive level, and frankly, not some good follow-up on the part of council. Okay. And that's why we feel strongly this is a step backward. This is not the answer.
I think when the light of day is shined upon everything involved with the sheriff's office, mm-hmm. the jail, and who said what, did what I know, I think your opinion's going to change. But that remains to be seen. That remains to be seen. It's the big enchilada sitting out there. Got a lot of people indicted, a lot of things going on. A lot of things that this council tried to do got blocked. A lot of things that this council tried to do got blocked. And in my committee alone, we got lied to. We got lied to. And people died. We got lied to. And we didn't have the authority to do anything other than have committee meetings. We've asked questions in my committee on where $300,000 grant went. And rather than answer in this committee, the guy retired. So we got problems here, but I really appreciate you've helped me out a lot as to how we got to the appointed sheriff. And in the real world, that sounds good, but we're in a bad spot right now. We're trying to figure out a way out of this. And again, as I said, and I prefaced, I don't know that this is the right way to go. But I certainly know, I know for a fact, the way we are going is not the way to go. We've got some serious issues, and I greatly appreciate you being here and helping me out, because none of us were behind the doors when these issues were discussed. And it sounds to me like you put a lot of thought and effort into this. Judge or Mayor Rawson did say that you talked to an expert, but she couldn't remember who. Do you know a law person or expert? Maybe she was talking about me, Mr. Kramer. I don't know if she wasn't specific. But was there anyone else that was brought in to discuss this situation?
Very definitely, Mr. Councilman. I'm sorry, I can't remember your name.
And it was 11 years ago, and believe me, I can't remember last week. So
I do know this, that we made, those of us behind the charter, we realized that this is a new area for us. We made a point of looking at the Summit Akron Charter. We looked at the Pittsburgh Allegheny Charter.
Right.
And to try to learn from that. By the way, just parenthetically, we automatically set in that charter a 2-year period after which there would be a charter review commission. We knew we didn't have it perfect. Our thought was that after 2 years, the first elected council and the first elected county executive, we would learn from them, what did we miss? What didn't we clarify? Right. What did we need to correct? And so there was that commission. I had the good fortune of chairing that commission. Mm-hmm. And we looked at some 26 issues. We interviewed 42 people, including all the members of the council at that time and the then county executive, and a number of experts. The League of Women Voters was involved to try to make, and we came up with 15 recommendations, which had to come back to council.
Okay.
And for council to take to the voters. Council elected to send only 4 of those issues to the ballot, but at least that was the process we followed. Who that law enforcement person was, I don't remember.
Okay, and again, that's not really important. I just thought maybe that would be helpful to us. But you're an honorable group, and I appreciate all the things that you did and the effort you put into it. I know it was burdensome. You did it without pay, and you did it for the good of the people of Cuyahoga County. Are there any questions for Mr. Brady?
Thank you, both of you, for being here. And Mr. Akers, I just wanted to focus in on one area that you mentioned, and I thank you for your service 11 years ago. I think in general, there's been a great deal of progress made by this new form of government. I do think it's only appropriate that when we have issues, we certainly have the right and responsibility to take a look at it.
Absolutely.
You had mentioned that you looked at the Summit County charter, and you also looked at the Pittsburgh-Allegheny County charter. And just the one question I have is, they chose, as you know, to have elected sheriffs in both Allegheny and in Summit County. So why were they wrong?
The feeling at the time was,
And what has happened in Summit County or Allegheny County concerning the sheriff's office that would give anybody the impression that they made a mistake?
that latter question I cannot answer. The first part, to answer your question, was that we felt, in light of what was going on under the commissioner form of government, and at the time, as is today, one of those commissioners and the auditor are in federal prison. We felt that we had the check and balance approach was best to where all were appointed by a strong county executive and approved, confirmed by a strong county council. So it wasn't why we didn't pick sheriff or why we did not follow the Summit or the Allegheny approach. We just felt there would be a stronger government, a more responsible government, to have them all under this check and balance structure. And may I add one more thing, Councilor Ray? Something was said by one of the ladies from League of Women Voters. I thought it was very important. If you change this to, goes back to the elected sheriff, and he or she has a problem, as was pointed out, you can't correct that right then and there once you have all the facts. You got to wait till the next election, which could be 3 or 4 years off. That is, I think, a concern we should weigh as you decide on this legislation.
Thank you very much.
Let me address the Summit County situation, since I have personal knowledge of that. I represented and advised the county charter commissions that were elected for the first 2 attempts to have a Summit County charter adopted. In both of those first 2 attempts, the charter was very similar to what we have here in Cuyahoga County, with almost all the county officials who had been elected being appointed. By the 3rd time, there was a similar situation in Cuyahoga County. The Ohio Constitution had been amended to provide for submitting a proposed charter by a petition. So it was a citizens group, not a county charter commission, and I think they felt a little shell-shocked after what had happened the first 2 times, and hoping to get support from elected officials, provided for the election of 4 of them, as I recall. So it was a political decision, not anything because they thought there was necessarily inherently better about having an elected sheriff or an elected engineer. It was a political decision. It had nothing to do with good government decisions.
Thank you.
Okay, we have Mr. Miller.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to mention that the esteemed mayor, the chairman of the Charter Review Commission, did not give himself and his commission enough credit, because it is true that in the immediately after the 15 recommendations came, we placed 4 of them on the ballot, but we didn't want to overload the ballot with too many at one time. And the following year, we put 4 more of the recommendations from the Charter Review Commission on the ballot. And everything that the Charter Commission recommended that we put on the ballot, the voters approved for a total of 8 amendments, which is a very high level of accomplishment. I just want to mention that and commend you for those efforts.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'd just like to, again, thank you for the work you did 11 years ago. We described you all as the architects, and I'll give Councilman Miller credit for a term that he described our role as saying building an airplane in flight, which was really accurate for what we were going through in those early days of trying to keep the government going, but actually build it at the same time. And we are still building. So I'm of the mindset that there is improvement that can be made, but I don't at this moment endorse the idea of going back to an elected sheriff. Having said that, I think it's important to, you made the comment that the sheriff was not a strong sheriff. Well, I won't try to qualify that one way or the other, but I think it's important for the community to know there were reasons why the sheriff was in the position that he was. And there's legislation put forward to try to strengthen those areas, to make sure that there are a greater level of independence. I don't think anyone disagrees with that need, with that assessment. There is a need for greater independence, but I think there is a solution beyond just going back to an elected sheriff. So I just wanted to more make a comment than ask you a question, but I just wanted to get that out there. And that legislation proposed, it actually speaks to a lot of the points. His ability to hire everyone under him, that is critical. The fact that he cannot be removed from office after, except for cause, and by 8 of this elected, 8 of this council. So again, factors that are built in to strengthen, I believe, is closer to the right solution. And maybe over this process, more that needs to be done, but I think that is a path worth investigating.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, and I'll remind council,
Mr. Chairman,
this is
go ahead.
here, we're here on the elected sheriff. We will have discussion July 11th on the other proposal or proposals. So let's stay focused here. We don't have a lot of time. I have a lot of questions up here for you, but if you wish to.
May I, Councilman Jones' comment, thank you for your thought. The feeling or the comment for those of us who done the charter was that if he or she is appointed and they're not doing the job, again, council, through its questioning in public forum, can put that pressure, if that's the right word, on the county executive to correct the situation. Whereas if elected and they're not doing the right job, guess what? You wait until that election. That's why we feel so strongly that with the check and balance you have in the present structure of government, you can address that. First, by the power of asking questions in public, and have the power of the media watching that, and try to get the situation corrected one way or the other. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sherman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You alluded to that you looked at the Summit County and its final document and the way the charter went together. How many elected positions are in the final Summit County? And what were those positions?
In the, in the final charter that was adopted in 1978, I believe it was, the offices of auditor and treasurer were combined in a single office, and a fiscal officer, I believe, is still elected. The engineer, and there have been several attempts in Summit County to amend the charter to provide for the appointment of the engineer, but the townships always insist they want the engineer to be elected, so that has not changed. The prosecutor is elected in Summit County, and
Is the sheriff?
the
Okay, I
sheriff.
was waiting to hear whether or not the sheriff was elected.
Yes.
I assume he was, but I
Those
wanted to hear it out of your
are
words.
the four
Allegheny County,
offices.
elected positions? Because those are your 2 benchmarks that you used.
Pardon me?
The benchmark, Allegheny County elected positions?
Well, we spent a little bit of time looking at Allegheny County, but we thought Ohio experience was more appropriate to deal with. We didn't.
Mr. Akers, you recall whether those were elected
dealing with
positions?
Allegheny County.
Okay, all right, we'll just,
And again,
okay. Would you accept that a friendly recommendation is that the sheriff was elected position in Allegheny County? Would you challenge that? I'm just trying to, if not, if you're not comfortable saying it, don't worry about it. We'll just-
I don't.
The facts are the
recall
facts,
very
whatever
much
they are.
discussion
Okay.
about that. I don't recall any amount of real discussion at all. It was a given on the part of the people who were involved in the charter of it that the sheriff, along with the other appointed officials, should be elected officials. There was no concern raised about that, no objection to it raised about to that.
Okay. Flipping to your Charter Review Commission, you got 22 items that you were recommending on that, Mr. Mayor, that came forward, and 15 ultimately that made the final cut?
We looked, no, Councilman Sean, we looked at 26 issues.
26, okay.
Some smaller
Okay.
and more
Within
important.
those 26, how many of the 26 that came out were recommendations for elected positions to be returned back to the county?
None.
Okay, so therefore, I can then make the cut that the 15 that came forward has to also be zero, where there were no recommendations for elected positions within that.
No, they dealt with other issues, as Councilman Miller.
Okay, as I recall, you did make a recommendation for strengthening the position of the Inspector General in in the first cut. It didn't make it through the ballot, but it did, is that a correct statement?
Yeah, when we look back on the Charter Review Commission 2 years after this, we realized we made a mistake in not spelling out the situation of Inspector General. And County Executive Fitzgerald did in fact make a point of coming to council, and council adopted the Inspector General position, but it was by legislation. Our concern was in the Review Commission, let's get that into the charter, so that if a future county executive or a future county council didn't want to deal with that, or wanted to defund it or pay no attention to it, we'd avoid that. So one of the 15 issues we did present was to put into the charter Inspector General. It did not.
I'm just trying to get to stay within what our chairman was asking us to do. So none of the fixes in that first round or the second round was a recommendation to elect any position to replace the ones that were not, that were in the old form of government.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Simon.
Mr. Chair, and for the gentleman before us, I want to thank you for authoring the county charter, the work you put into it, and the thought put into it. I knew that this document is a living document, just like the U.S. Constitution. That's why the charter provision was put in there, to mandate us to come back. But, and I also knew we'd be tested with this document, and it's sooner than I suspected or thought would happen. But I think this document can withstand these times, the arrows and everything else that's coming at us, without undoing the document and giving it space to breathe and to perhaps just be tweaked to address some of the current issues. But I just wanted to say thank you for giving us this document that enables this government, new government, to grow. And I think with this council, we'll be able to do that. And this, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that we encounter in our lives as elected officials, and we'll be able to do that with this document without throwing it out altogether, is my opinion. So thank you.
Ms. Stevens.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Stevens. One of the concerns I have is, did you contemplate the consideration of recall at any point in your deliberations?
Well, one of the innovations and one of the things that can be done in a county by adopting a charter is to include a recall provision. There is no such thing under the Ohio Revised Code for some reason, and I think one of the reasons is elected officials don't want the recall provision, but we do have it in Cotw. And that is one of the, if the members of this council, the county executive, the prosecutor are not doing their jobs, the people have the opportunity to recall them from office. The council also has broad investigative powers, even the subpoena power. So if people are lying to the council, I think that should be referred to the prosecutor. That's not a reason for changing the election of any of the officials. But yes, the recall is a powerful. It's not easy. It would be very difficult and should be used only in extraordinary circumstances. But that was one of the main reasons for proposing that and proposing the county charter.
And so if recall is a tool that you intended for the people of Cuyahoga County to have, we could use it on the executive, we could use it on a member of council, or we could use it on a potential sheriff. Yes?
Yes.
I think that's an excellent way for people who don't like the way their government is being led to change it without waiting for years for a new election, correct?
That can be done, yes.
And one statement I'd like to make is that one of the reasons we make changes in government is because of the people who sometimes do horrible jobs when they're supposed to be working on our collective behalfs. And we will have people who always do bad. We will have people who will always work to do good. And the goal is to get people in office who will focus on doing good for all of us at all times. Unfortunately, we all make mistakes. And recall is a tool that we could use whether we decide to elect a sheriff or whether we don't, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. I greatly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be here. You've been very helpful to us.
Thank you.
I'm going to go out of order just a little bit, and if I could call Sheriff Bob Reed.
Mr. Chairman, Council President, and all of Council, it's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for having me. First, I'd like to thank all of the chiefs of police in attendance. In addition to President Gary Wolski of the State of Ohio Fraternal Order of Police, representing over 23,000 officers statewide, and other FOP and police departments represented. A special thanks to the Cuyahoga County Chiefs of Police Association and their position of supporting an elected sheriff in Cuyahoga County, and all the sheriffs from all over the state of Ohio that are here today, in addition to Bob Cornwell, the Buckeye State Sheriff's Executive Director. First, if you Google sheriff in the United States, the definition comes back: an elected officer in a county who is responsible for keeping the peace. When people hear the word sheriff, some may think of Sheriff Andy Taylor of Mayberry. He was a model of community policing before the term was invented. Or perhaps Sheriff Joe Arpaio of Maricopa County in Arizona, who wrote the book America's Toughest Sheriff. Or the Sheriff of Nottingham from the days of Robin Hood. I certainly hope the image of the sheriff and those around Cuyahoga County and the state of Ohio, 88 in Ohio, 87 of those elected, is a positive one. Where did the title of sheriff come from, and what makes the office of sheriff unique in law enforcement, and why is it important to preserve, or in the case of Cuyahoga County, return to an elected sheriff? Why would it be called sheriff's office and not a sheriff's department? And why is it important to preserve or resurrect its direct accountability to the citizens via the election process? I hope I can answer these questions in the next 15 minutes. The first of the two important characteristics that distinguish the office of sheriff from other law enforcement units is its historical roots. In England, the sheriff came into existence around the 9th century. This makes the sheriff the oldest continuing non-military law enforcement entity in history. In early England, the land was divided into geographic areas between a few individual kings. These geographic areas were called shires. Within each shire, there was an individual called a reeve, which meant guardian. This individual was originally selected by the serfs to be their informal social and governmental leader. The kings observed how influential these individuals were and within the serf community and incorporated the position into the government structure. The reeve soon became the king's appointed representative to protect the king's interests and act as a mediator with people of this particular shire. Through time and usage, the word shire and reeve came together to be shireve, guardian of the shire, and eventually the word sheriff as we know it today. The first sheriff in America is believed to be Captain William Stone, appointed in 1634 for the Shire of Northampton and the colony of Virginia. The first elected sheriff was William Waters in 1652 in the same county. They called them shires then, but then later on the colonies reworded it as counties to replace it. The duties of the American sheriff were similar in many ways to its English forerunner, centering on court-related duties such as security and warrants, protection of citizens, maintaining the jail, and collecting taxes. As our nation expanded westward, the office of sheriff continued to be a significant part of law enforcement. The elected sheriff is part of America's democratic fabric. In 1976, Pennsylvania and New Jersey adopted the office of sheriff in their constitution. The Ohio Constitution called for the election of the county sheriff in 1802, and then state by state, the democratic election of sheriff became not only a tradition, but in most states a constitutional requirement. In the United States today, of the 3,083 sheriffs, approximately 98% are elected by the citizens of the county or parishes. There were many sheriffs in the early West, and a few did not live up to the standards of the badge they wore. Some sheriffs were indicted for abuse of power, drunkenness, and corruption. The vast majority served with courage and distinction. In reviewing those that served in the office of sheriff, there are many interesting individuals, such as Augustine Washington, George Washington's father, who was sheriff of Westmoreland County in Virginia in 1727, Wild Bill Hickok, Pat Garrick, Bat Masterson, Bob Reed, and many more. Just wanted to make sure you guys were paying attention. As I mentioned earlier, there are two characteristics that distinguish the office of sheriff. The second characteristic that sets the sheriff's office apart from other law enforcement agencies is its direct accountability to the citizens to the election of the sheriff. The office of sheriff should not be a department of county government. It is an independent office through which the sheriff exercises the powers of the public trust. No individual or small group hires or fires the sheriff or has the authority to interfere with the operations of the office. Elected sheriffs are accountability directly to the Constitution of their state, the United States Constitution, statutes, and citizens of their county. The sheriff should naturally do his best to work with all entities because it's important in a democratic society. The sheriff must work with all segments of government to serve and protect the citizens of the county. The preservation of the office of sheriff is vital to our republic. Outside a few elected town marshals, the sheriff is the only head of a law enforcement agency in this nation that is accountable directly to the people of his or her jurisdiction. In 2010, the National Sheriff's Association passed Resolution 2010-11 that specifically presents the reasons why an elected sheriff needs to be maintained as an elected office and since the early history of our country. I was privileged to get much of this information from Sheriff Roger Scott of DeKalb County and my good friend Dan Dunlap of Lake County Sheriff's Office. Let's now focus on Cotw County and a very brief history. As you know, Gerald McFall was elected sheriff of Cotw County in 1976 and served in that capacity for 33 years. You'll also remember McFall was elected when the sheriff of the county did not have to be a law enforcement officer. That was changed in 1981. When elected, McFall was smart in hiring and surrounding himself with law enforcement professionals and did an excellent job in the early years. Later in his career, he lost focus on what's important in the office of sheriff and severely violated the trust of his subordinates and, more important, the public trust. When the plain dealer, specifically reporter Mark Puente, who did a great job, began digging deeper into what was happening in the sheriff's office and offices throughout the county, a significant change was coming. McFall was reelected in 2008, and immediately afterward, the inner workings of the sheriff office was revealed. Not the majority of hardworking sheriff office employees, but the tyranny at the top. McFall resigned in shame in March 2009 and he was later indicted. At that time, I was city manager of the city of Bedford for 9 years, having retired as chief of police of Bedford after serving 25 years on the police department. I served in every capacity in the police department, as well as being selected to the FBI National Academy in 1992, and became the president of the Cuyahoga County Chiefs Association in 2000. I share that not to impress you, but to exemplify the trust my colleagues had in me, as well as council and the mayor in the city of Bedford. I was contacted in March 2009 by members of the Democratic Party if I was interested in the position of sheriff in Cuyahoga County. Although many candidates, it was the duty of the Democratic Party to choose the next sheriff consistent with the Ohio Revised Code. Fortunately, I had kept my law enforcement certification up to date as the safety director of Bedford, as well as the city manager. I entered the 45-day race and was elected by the Democratic Party to become the next sheriff of Cuyahoga County. I left a position in Bedford that I enjoyed very much, took a $12,000 a year cut in salary, entering a hornet's nest of morale problems, an ongoing BCI investigation into the office and its employees, 1,100 employees, 6 different unions, 10 separate bargaining units, 18 laid-off deputies, short personnel in every department, and much, much more, under the watchful eye of the plain dealer. But why not end your career in the largest sheriff's office in the state of Ohio, and equally important, my own boss as an elected sheriff? Sink or swim, it was on me to have the direction, to set the direction of the ship. I learned very quickly that the organization was filled with talented employees who had been sequestered for many years. They had great ideas and great thought, and were excited to learn that I had an open ear to fresh approach. The first weeks in office, I had a very difficult job of relieving many employees of their duties. Regardless of how important it was to the organization, it's difficult to fire people, although knowing how important it is to the success of the organization. This will be the first of many times I tell you that only an elected sheriff can accomplish. I made these difficult decisions in a few days after consulting our council and executed those decisions. In a subordinate position, the sheriff would have to go through a minutia of people waiting weeks to get an answer, and many times not the one he wants. I know because of the last 2 years in office, I experienced that waste of time and resources as an appointed position. Most important, I don't want some of these projects and their cancellation to reflect negatively on the sitting sheriff, Cliff Pinckney. He's an extremely talented law enforcement professional that wasn't given the opportunity nor the authority to lead. First, let me share a few decisions made in the first 2 years of my office as an independent sheriff in an elected position, and for the most part autonomous from the rest of the county government, except my budget, which I was always focused. I know for a fact I would not have been able to do these projects as an appointed sheriff. After months of working with division heads and staff, we were starting to operate as a machine. Maybe not well oiled as yet, but certainly getting there. We changed policy and procedure, introduced classes on ethics. All promotions and hiring were based on testing. Changed an atmosphere where it was who you knew and not what you knew. We put screen monitors throughout the area where staff took breaks, ate lunch, congregated with announcements of accomplishments, weddings, new babies, promotion, anything that would lift morale, and it worked. It showed management cared from the sheriff all the way down. One of the first projects was coordinating the pickup of our prisoners in all suburbs in Cuyahoga County. To clarify that, when a patrol officer, say for example in South Euclid, would make a traffic stop and find a felony warrant out of Cuyahoga County on this individual, the officer would have to bring them back to the station, book them in, contact the sheriff's office to see when they could bring that prisoner down to the jail. They may wait a day or two, and they have to commit 2 officers to transport that individual to the county jail. A community that may only have 2 officers on the road at any given shift may have to commit overtime to get the prisoners to the county. When I became sheriff, I worked with Bill Mason in the prosecutor's office to change that policy. The prosecutor used seized funds to purchase a van and the sheriff's office committed 4 deputies to respond to every city in Cuyahoga County within 24 hours to pick up those prisoners. This was welcomed by chiefs all over Cuyahoga County in saving overtime and increased safety by not pulling officers out of the city for transport. This valuable service stopped approximately 3 years ago due to cuts in personnel. We were vigorously trying to get the 18 deputies that were laid off back on payroll, in addition to a number of other laid off employees. The first thing I looked at were prisoner transfers and the amount of money we were spending to house prisoners in other jurisdictions when the jail was over capacity. We were paying anywhere from $55 a day to $90 a day to different jails throughout Cuyahoga County and Northeast Ohio. I always listened carefully to Ken Cotw, the Director of Corrections. I always felt that Ken forgot more about corrections than I could ever know, so his opinion was very valuable to me. I had our in-house consul, Chris Russ, also a very valuable staff member, do the research. He came back and advised me the sheriff can set the stipend to be paid to these municipalities. I decided we would pay $55 a day to any of these jails, in addition to Geauga County Jail that had been charging us $55 a day. We also decided to send younger inmates to these facilities, in addition to those not on medication, those not in poor health, because we were responsible for their health, their welfare, and prescription drugs. In 4 years I was sheriff, we saved the county $16+ million on prisoner transfers alone. Don't take my word for it. Check with the Office of Budget. Maggie Kean, she's such a talented staff member, she surely would verify. I tell you this not to shine my star, but to emphasize what an independent elected sheriff can accomplish. Think about this for a minute today. If this would occur, mayors from all over Cuyahoga County in Northeast Ohio would be calling council members, council president, and county executive that their valuable resources were being taken away from them. Would that practice be stopped? You do the math. When I did it, I received many calls, but what wanted to say to them is that they'd been ripping off the county for a long time. I was more professional than that most of the time. Also, I'll get to why I wanted to save that money, aside from the obvious of being a good county employee or office holder in that time. I'll do that in a few minutes. We began working on grants to get the laid-off staff returned. If a subordinate sheriff, I again would have had to go through the layers of personnel to get match money. Instead, we found it in our budget and applied it by the signature of the sheriff. Those 18 laid-off deputies were returned to duty within 6 months of my appointment. In May 2010, Marty Flask, then safety director of the city of Cleveland, contacted me for a meeting between Mayor Jackson and Chief McGrath. They proposed a central booking and jail system, that is, the county taking over all the prisoners. This was in 2010. I was still an elected sheriff. This would introduce an additional 250 prisoners into our jail, as well as fresh arrests from Cleveland. I always had envisioned a central booking area for the entire county and taking over the housing of all prisoners. I felt with many adjustments we could do it better than Cleveland. Not to disparage, but I just felt we could. I told them that we had to put in motion a plan that would take considerable time. We started working on the plan right away, visiting the workhouse in Warrensville and then the central jail downtown. Ken Cotw suggested we gut the third floor detective bureau and make that a central booking area, putting millions of dollars or $1 million into that area, with the elevator from the Sally Port going directly to the third floor. I shared the idea with Chief McGrath, who felt it was certainly worth looking further. I always felt introducing this many prisoners into the facility built for 1,762 and housing over 2,000 every day was a bad idea without a great deal of planning. When the government changed in January of 2011, our plans came to a standstill. My point is sharing this project again would never have started had to go through the layer of bureaucracy that there is. We're doing all of this only with the vision of good law enforcement and jail management in mind. Again, this is no reflection on Sheriff Pinckney, but when you take away his authority to make decisions solely on the vision of good law enforcement, then you significantly erode his authority. When the sheriff is not permitted to hire the director of corrections and the director does not answer to the sheriff, you again erode the sheriff's authority. And lastly, on this matter, when you hire a director of corrections who has no experience in corrections, all of this is a recipe for disaster. We had so many projects and success stories that occurred in the first 2 years of an elected sheriff, none more important than prisoner welfare. I hired Dr. John Burnett, a then retired physician whose expertise was federal correctional medicine, and did it for 35 years. Dr. Barnett was put in charge of the jail medical unit and did a great job. Our plan was to hire our own medical staff, and he was going to be in charge. We were excited and felt that his direction and the medical unit would thrive. I'll come back to this in just a few minutes. As I said earlier, we saved the county $16 million over 4 years, and again, not only because it was the right thing to do, but I wanted to invest that money back into the jail medical unit. Hire more nurses, better wages, more pharmacy techs, on and on with personnel. Acquire electronic medical records. At that time, it was 2011, and we still had paper files on all of these frequent flyers to the jail. I would argue that spending $1 million now will pay back multiple times in avoided lawsuits, equally important being the right thing to do for our staff and inmates. It never happened after I was appointed sheriff, mainly due to, again, the layers of government and falling on deaf ears on the top. When the government changed in January 2011, I believe County Executive Ed Fitzgerald appointed me sheriff because he didn't want to take a political hit early on because the sheriff office was doing so well. We never really got along. Many of the projects we were put on hold. Even though I didn't care for Fitzgerald, I knew he had a tough job coming into the position and asked our staff and personnel to be patient. I hoped that some of our projects would come to fruition. The first year, we tolerated each other, although he allowed me to create the impact unit in the sheriff's office, which we already had on the drawing board. The impact unit consisted of 10 deputies who did it all: fugitives, narcotic enforcement, assistance to any community in Cotw County that had a pressing issue or anticipated problems at an event. We were and still are very successful with that unit. I'm sure the most contention between Fitzgerald and I was in the jail. In addition to my not appreciating his style of governing, I was constantly asking that his hiring practices in the jail, nurses, assistants, pharmacy techs, be expedited.
Sheriff, if we could move.
2 minutes.
Okay.
In addition to salary increases for nurses, in retrospect, could have done this when I was an appointed sheriff. Fitzgerald and Matt Carroll at the time, Elise Hare was sick of hearing from me and the jail issues and staffing. I think I and John Barnett actually spoke to council at their request over issues for the jail. I believe Fitzgerald and others felt that this was a violation of trust. I spoke to John Barnett almost every day on prisoner issues and was concerned he would resign. My worst thought came true in December of 2012. When Burnett came to the office with an envelope in hand, he stated he was sorry, but he couldn't continue. He knew that me and many others were trying to make it better, but it was a difficult road. That was a disappointing day, and certainly the staff of the medical unit. Again, an independent sheriff would never have let that happen. He would have acted in the best interest of the correction center. 2 minutes. On January 3rd, 2013, I was asked to come to the executive's office. When I arrived, Fitzgerald was there, and he said to me that that the sheriff's office, or county rather, was going in a new direction, and I was no longer going to continue as sheriff. I told him that I'd been in this uncomfortable position many times, that is, dismissing someone, but would always tell the individual why, and certainly they knew, or they certainly knew why. I asked him why. He would not give me an answer, and he said he was going in a different direction. He said I could resign or do whatever I want, but I was no longer the sheriff. I said I deserved better than that and left the office. 2 weeks later, I left my office in uniform and went down to the elevator to the Justice Center main floor. When the elevator opened, there were 150 employees clapping and thanking me for my service. It was an emotional day. During that 2-week period, I told Matt Carroll I would not resign without a reason. They never gave me one, but I can certainly think of a few. There is no letter of resignation in my file. What I was extremely disappointed with, there was no outrage on the part of the Plain Dealer, the League of Women Voters, and others, but an editorial in the PD that said, No explanation on the part of the Fitzgerald for the firing. This is the way the government is designed to work, and it shouldn't be. I'm very confident what happened to Sheriff's Department, not office, specifically the Correction Center, would not have occurred under an independent, autonomous sheriff. When a good leader doesn't have the authority to lead, it's a recipe for disaster. I could counter and answer the Plain Dealer article in the League of Women Voters on every issue. Who more important than a Cuyahoga County Chiefs Association, in their opinion, whereas the county sheriff should return to an elected office? They saw the success that can be achieved in a short period of time and the erosion that can occur as well. An elected sheriff sinks or swims. I have faith in the 2019 and the electorate who would choose the correct direction to take and return the position to an elected office. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Sheriff Reed, and I will remind everyone of our time constraints. Questions? Yes, sir.
Sheriff Reed, thank you very much for your service and your time, both in the elected and appointed time for the county.
Thank you.
You mentioned a number of times, probably almost every time the word came out of elected, it was preceded by the word independent. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Our all of our judicial offices in this county are also independent,
Correct.
nonpartisan.
Correct.
I'm going to ask you a tough one here.
Yeah.
Should this be a nonpartisan election?
You mean the November election?
No. For this position you are recommending.
Oh, as sheriff.
Yes.
Should it be a nonpartisan position?
Independent is the word you always used. You never used any other word.
You know, Councilman, it's a really good question. I hadn't really thought about that. I believe it should be. I believe that the best person for the job should get the job as the county sheriff. So maybe it shouldn't be. It should be a nonpartisan position. It's certainly so important for all the men and women of this department, the 1,100 employees, for somebody to be there for the vision of law enforcement. And you know what? Maybe it is. Maybe that's a great idea, that it's a nonpartisan position, and let the best person win, and at the same time be the leader that he can be without having to think about the party that they belong to. But I might add this: when I became the Democratic sheriff, picked by the Democratic Party, I never really looked back. I mean, I never took any direction from the Democratic Party. I probably did the opposite when I got calls from certain people that wanted me to hire people and do other things. I probably went in an opposite direction. So I never had an issue when I was sheriff as far as Democrat or Republican. I think I always did what I thought was the right thing to do.
But you prefaced your remarks with the previous sheriff was one that drifted in the wrong direction.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Ms. Conwell.
Through the chair to Sheriff Reed.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. So just answer me one question. Who did you report to when you were the appointed sheriff?
Directly to Matt Carroll and to Ed Fitzgerald. And I might just add, if I may, that was a problem. When you're dealing with everyday situation, not that they were busy people. I mean, that's at the end of the day. But hiring became very, very, very slow. And when we were short so many corrections officers, I would go to Elise Hara, I would go to Matt Carroll, and I would go to Ed Fitzgerald. And it just moved at glacial speed. So to answer your question, they're the people I appointed, reported to.
So that's the difference that I've seen between the two administrations. So how do you feel? You stated from your perspective the hiring was very slow. Well, in terms of under the new leadership, they have put a deputy chief over the sheriff. So what do you feel about that? That may have speeded up the process for hiring, but it clearly has given us other issues.
You know, I don't know if it speeded it up or not. All I know is in 2011 or 12 and 13, it was at a snail's pace. We did, when I was an independent elected sheriff, we did all the interviewing. We did things expeditiously. Although I was one of the first department heads when I became, or when I elected office, that asked to go to the central, to the HR department of the county to do hiring. Because I felt maybe with us doing the interviews and the sheriff being the last entity to make the last person to make the decision, that it would go faster by going through through the county's HR department and then coming to us. It went pretty smooth when the first 2 years that I was sheriff. It slowed down considerably later.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Sheriff, for your service. I appreciated our time together when you were obviously serving in both positions. You gave us a fact. You said the capacity of the county jail was 1762?
Correct.
Is that accurate number?
That's correct.
How did that number change over your time? Did it rise above, low? What did you see in your time?
Right. The majority of the time, there was one day I was extremely excited when it was 1975, the count. It was always 2,000, 2,050, 2,100. As it approached those numbers, Ken Cotw would come to me and we would start shipping people out to different jails. So it's still around 2,000. What I found, and maybe the information I have is not totally accurate, but when the sheriff's office took over the prisoners, Cleveland prisoners, they incorporated 200 and some additional prisoners into that facility, taking the number up to 2,350. I think that alone was a recipe for disaster. When you're piling people up, when you're shorthanded on corrections officers, when you're sequestering these prisoners into their cell for 24 hours a day because you don't have the personnel, putting 2,300 is unimaginable to me, just unimaginable. And that's what I told Marty Flask, who is a good friend of mine, the safety director. We need to do a lot of planning before we do this. So, yeah, it was built for 1762, and I don't know if it ever saw it from the day it opened.
Next, I've been told, it's been stated by advocacy groups that there are a number of individual mental health challenges. Their number was about 1/3 of the total population. Could you speak to what your experience was, and what is that mental health population?
Well,
If I may.
I'll be real quick if you want. It's up to you.
If you could be real quick, Ms. Jones, we're trying to stay on point here. We don't have a lot of time.
No, it's a great question. You know, 1/3 of the population of the jail, so you're looking at 700 inmates were on some type of psychotropic medication. I mean, I don't know how the pharmacy did it. They did a wonderful, wonderful job every day. But we've lost one of our best psychiatrists. From what I understand, she just resigned recently. She was really great, on the ball. My point is that, you know what, you need more people to screen these people as they come in. That's how you catch the people who are going to commit suicide. It just is. It's good policing up front.
So you're referring to Dr. Leslie?
God, you know what? I'm sorry.
But thank you.
But she was fabulous, psychiatrist at the jail.
That was my final question.
Okay. Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate your time.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for coming
Thank you,
in
Counsel.
all the way from
It was always a
California
pleasure
to
to be in front of
testify.
you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah. The Right Honorable Mark Stanton, please.
Mark Stanton thought he was going to be last, but apparently not. Mr. Chairman, Council President Brady, council members, I was contacted relative to this issue 24 hours ago, maybe 26 hours ago. A phone call out of the blue. I didn't know that anyone would be interested in my viewpoint, and you may not be after about 10 minutes. But I do have definite thoughts about this and about this issue. So I'm going to ask, because I don't have that much ability, I'm not sufficiently talented, eloquent, or intelligent enough to give you a cohesive presentation at this time, because I had to do it and throw it together, and these are random thoughts. I'll try to make it as cohesive as I can. But one thing that I continue to see throughout the media, and actually, quite honestly, in discussions with individuals who are interested in this issue, and in county government is we can't return to something that didn't work. There's a permanence to that thought and to that belief. We can't return to something that didn't work. And I know that we're talking about the sheriff here, and I'm not going to ask you that let's go hire another Mr. McFall, whom I knew quite well personally. But I will tell you this, and Sheriff Reed just referenced it. For all of his shortcomings, and they were considerable, and you'll never hear me lionize him, that county jail was efficient. He had the right people in place. And although he went astray, and he started to look at himself as being the focal point and not the job and not the responsibility and the obligation to the community, that jail worked. It was efficient from the moment everybody got up until they closed it down at night. I'm also going to say, when you think about it didn't work, let's look at from 1970 to 2010. If I offend anybody here, it's completely unintentional. But I ask you to look at things historically. And I try to say this to all the attorneys in my office who, are half my age or even younger than that. If you don't know where you came from, if you don't have an understanding of the historical perspective of anything, you can't possibly project where you need to go. So I'm going to drop 11 names on you that I just wrote down this morning. And if you don't recognize the names or their respective and enduring accomplishments between 1970 and 2010, I don't think any of you can state justifiably that it didn't work. Tim Hagan, Tim McCormick, Seth Taft, Peter Lawson Jones, Lee Weingart, Virgil Brown, Hugh Corrigan, Vince Campanella, Robert E. Sweeney. I wouldn't be standing here today unless somebody like Robert E. Sweeney had the vision and the toughness to say we need a public defender's office for this community. Ed Feehan, Jim Petro. Are all of you embarrassed? Is this community embarrassed by those 11 individuals? Did they do a lousy job? Did any of them get indicted? No, but we think about Damora and Russo, so therefore it didn't work. To the contrary, it worked beautifully. It worked back in 1920 when Edward C. Stanton was the county prosecutor, my grandfather. It worked. It works today with Mike O'Malley. Don't give me this baloney that it doesn't work. It works. But it doesn't work when you have somebody in there with no voice and no accountability. Has anybody here visited the county jail in the last 40 years? How about regularly during the past 40 years? How about regularly during the last 5 years or 10 years or 3 years? How about 40 times? How about 3,540 times, which is my conservative estimate of how many times I walked through that county jail since 1978 and exited it some hours later? How about contrasting difficulties within the past 5 years and most acutely within the last couple of years versus the preceding 35 years? Allow me to provide a contrast. It worked efficiently, responsibly, and consistently from 1978 until the time that Frank Bova left. And it did not work under Frank Bova. Bob Reed, Frank Bova is a tremendously talented individual, as is Bob Reed. But they didn't have autonomy. And there was a dramatic fall off in the manner in which that jail and the sheriff's office in and of itself performed as opposed to the preceding 40 years. Because suddenly there was no accountability. Suddenly inquiries from defense attorneys, judges, prosecutors relative to basic services, inmate concerns were not being answered directly, or in most instances, folks, they're being ignored. I haven't received an answer, a concrete answer, in the 2 years that I've been a public defender. Repeated approaches to the previous jail director were fruitless. I had to ask John Russo, the administrative judge, to intervene constantly. And then he'd receive an answer that was contradictory to something that was implied to me. So to whom do you direct your questions for a direct answer? How about health care? How about medication? How about visitation? Who can visit? What about the families? The times of visitation? Weekend visitation? How about education within the jail? How about the fact that for a year period of time, you had juveniles who were bound over from juvenile court, sitting in that jail. First of all, they're interspersed with adults, which is completely impermissible. Nobody cared. Nobody was accountable for that. And secondly, I asked 15 times, and that's conservative, why aren't the young people, the juveniles, receiving education? It's statutorily mandated. There was a contract with the Board of Education. It had expired 8 months ago. We're on it. We're on it, said the jail director to me. We're on it, said the warden. We're on it, Judge Russo. Don't worry about it. They not only weren't on it, they weren't on it for a year. These are violations occurring every day right in front of everybody. And there's no answers being provided. So where's the accountability? And I ask you to compare the accountability to 350,000 voters in this county as opposed to the accountability to one person over here on East 9th Street. To whom are you answerable? 350,000 people or one individual? And how about the motivation and necessity to be reliable? Isn't it always, no matter what your endeavor is, it isn't always predicated upon the expectation to perform competently and, yes, admirably in your position? And what's the expectation of an agency's workforce? And I'm speaking specifically about the sheriff or any county agency. If the workforce knows that the elected sheriff has their backs, will negotiate a budget accordingly, possess the autonomy and motivational necessity to be sensitive and responsive to the need for discipline and resources to conduct an efficient agency, those people that work within that system need to know that. The appointed sheriff has no voice, has no autonomy, is neither encouraged nor rewarded for being innovative and aggressive. Does anyone here honestly believe that if Cliff Pinckney had been elected sheriff and not appointed, that he would have allowed or delegated that job in the jail to someone else? That he would have ignored that situation? That he wouldn't have been responsible to that situation? He's a good and decent man. I've known him for 30 years. He used to take my clients up and down from the bullpen and from the jail up to the courtrooms and back. But he's had no voice in the interim. Never once in the 2 years that I've been the public defender have I encountered him on one single issue, even though I've had dozens of issues, scores of issues to present. I've never received a response from him on multiple issues. And I ask you to contrast that with the many years when he was a deputy sheriff and then he was in the task force. He was completely sensitive to the plight of prisoners, especially indigent individuals who couldn't afford bond. He was completely sensitive to the situation in the jail. He understood those things. He has a working knowledge of it. He wasn't some automaton, so who did I talk to now? Talk to the sergeant. Talk to George Taylor. I'd go and talk to a sergeant. I'd talk to George Taylor, and what would I get from him? A shrug? It's not my job. I don't know. Somebody else has to make that decision. Well, whose decision is it? Who's going to make the decision? I'm not sure. You're the deputy warden. I'm not sure. I don't know. Talk to him. I felt after a while, folks, in the last 2 years, that I was watching Ray Bolger as the Scarecrow, hanging on a post there out in the cornfields in The Wizard of Oz. Well, you should ask that guy, ask that guy. You could ask either one of them. That's the direction this has been going. First day as a public defender, May of 2017. I walked in here, I sat right where this gentleman's sitting. I was sitting next to my predecessor, Mr. Tobick, and two other individuals from our office. And I was being introduced to a group of you. It was an auspicious day for me. I walked up here, but before I walked up here, I had to listen as the jail director, warden, provided assurances to council, and especially to you, Councilman Gallagher, that the visitation issues had been resolved and rectified. He went on to state over a 15-minute period of time, deliberate and blatant misstatements. And I knew that because I was integrally involved in that as a former president of the Criminal Defense Lawyers Association and still actively involved in that, and I did a lot of that negotiation. These were blatant misstatements. I was so red that I was purple. And that's not an auspicious first appearance to introduce myself and immediately assail the warden as disingenuous or, more truthfully, patently untruthful. And he talks about expanding the jail population. Same guy who said to me and said in countless meetings, don't worry about it, we're ready. We can handle it. You couldn't handle the situation prior to the expansion, and now you're adding the entire Cleveland jail population? Overcrowding already existed. It will be alleviated by adding the Cleveland jail situation? Are beds available? Is personnel available? Are medical and psychological psychiatric services available? Dozens of additional issues arose. And where was the accountable reporting other than, we can do it, don't worry about it, we'll be ready? I heard this man say, we'll be ready 15 times. Well, we is a faulty pronoun, because he sure as hell wasn't ready. So what has occurred? 9 inmates have died in less than 9 months, and the U.S. Marshal has found inhumane conditions in the jail. Now we're responding? What if only 3 inmates had died? Would we still be responding? What if only 1 inmate had died? Would we be responding? Would our indignation be this deep? Would it be this abiding? Would we have to get on our little soapboxes and talk about these deplorable conditions and that can't exist? Does anyone honestly believe that the conditions were less humane when people weren't dying? It's been inhumane for years. It takes a dead body to convince you that that situation over there was pathetic? You've had 4 sheriffs in 9 years. How's that worked out, folks? Highly productive, highly efficient, reliable? There's a key word, reliability. Have any of those sheriffs been motivated to be creative and progressive in corrections? Has anyone actually studied corrections? Has anyone gone to other federal facilities, other state facilities, and see how it's done? We got a jail that's vertical, for Christ's sake. Pardon my language. Nobody builds vertical jails. You have them spread out horizontally. It's better control. It's more segregated so that there's better services and better attention paid. Who cares is what many people think. Don't worry about it. The public doesn't care. The electorate doesn't care. Those guys belong in jail anyway. Well, in truth, many of them do not belong in jail. They belong in treatment facilities or receiving services, none of which they received over there in the community. And I'm just going to stick in a little bail reform there at the same token, because it's inextricably entwined with what's going on in that jail. I will tell you, folks, and I know you know it inherently, whether anybody wants to admit it or not, you got tens of thousands of citizens in the community that are embarrassed and angered by this unforgivable and avoidable blight on their community. We embarrass every citizen in this community when that kind of stuff is going on. And we just had the people from DLR sitting in my office today talking about jail population. This woman has built jails all over the country. And she told me unequivocally, that's one of the 5 worst situations I've ever seen in my life. 40 years I've been doing this. First as a prosecutor, the last 34 years as a defense attorney. And I'm still haunted and chilled by the frightening permanency of the jail's door slamming behind me as I exit after speaking with a client, knowing the inhumane and utterly demeaning conditions to which they must return. That emotion has never diminished for me, folks, and has been escalated to an appalling degree by the inexcusable and unforgivable management of the county jail in recent years. Someone has to be accountable and embrace that responsibility. That obligation will never be realized if the sheriff continues to be appointed. And on my most basic level of symbolism, let me throw this out to you. When was the last time anybody referred to Cliff Pinckney or Frank Bova or Bob Reed as the county sheriff? It's the sheriff. It's not the county sheriff. It's the sheriff. I would ask you to think about that a little bit. Because if you're the county sheriff, you're responsible to every citizen in this county. If you're the sheriff, you're responsible to some guy who appointed you. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Stanton? Yes, ma'am.
I have just one question for you.
Yes,
The
Council
way
Baker.
the county charter reads and how it was designed, all roads lead to the executive. All roads. He's the executive that hires and fires. Why in those number of years that you saw that things were bad, getting no answers from the sheriff and no answers from those that were supporting the sheriff, why wasn't the county executive then the person who should have been alerted and made the decisions that should have been made, given what you have seen being so close to those jails?
Well, I certainly agree with that. The problem is I live in a myopic world. When I'm an individual private attorney at this time, my access is to judges, administrative judges, the sheriff, and the workings of the sheriff. So am I an expert in county law? I am not. I haven't embraced the charter, but yes, of course, you're right. So I was remiss in that regard. I haven't been remiss in the last 2 years, I don't think. I think I've been probably maybe a little bit impertinent, and I apologize for that at times. But I don't receive any answers from anyone, ever, at any time.
All right, I share your frustration. I'm just.
No, I have more than frustration.
I
Ms. Baker.
understand, but the way the
I have
party.
outright hostility for this situation.
Right. We have a form of government that has a very, I mean, without exception, a very itemized way of solving issues, especially when we have one person at the top that we have given the authority to go to when things like this happen. And when we find out too late, our question is, where was the executive at the time when these things were happening? And why, when all others failed, which are directors, if any of them are in a place where they have failed, where does the accountability lie? And as far as the charter reads, the way I see it, it falls at the feet of the executive. And that is why I'm asking, where was that communication at the time when you saw it perhaps at its worst before many of us did? And I don't expect an answer. I'm just saying that's where my deepest concern lies.
I certainly understand that. I'm sensitive to it, and I appreciate your comments.
Other questions? Well, I wish I would have taken you last. But now Mr. O'Malley has to follow you. Thank you, Mr. Stanton, for your time. Yes.
Thank you. Just in terms of the council understanding our time frame now, this has been a very, very interesting discussion, but it continues to go on. We will take this as long as it goes on, and then we will go to executive session. And if the council meeting starts at 5:30, the council meeting starts at 5:30. We've never done that in the past, but it seems that this situation is one in which we have to let this play out and give ourselves all a chance to do what we need to do.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, County Council. Usually I just jot down some words and some notes before I begin to speak, and I freeform it much as Mr. Stanton has done. He, as you indicate, is a very tough act to follow. But I can tell you, much like Mr. Stanton, I also served a few years in the previous government. And it was a government, quite frankly, that worked. That when you called an office, you got a response. I worked with hand in hand with Bob Reed, our sheriff at the time, and his commitment and his dedication cannot be underestimated. In the last several days, I spoke to a couple of the council people, and I expressed my frustration with the sheriff's department, starting from back when I was the safety director of the city of Parma. And I received that phone call that the county jail was going to be eliminating their pickups, and I was given 7 days' notice. And as the sheriff has indicated, that required me as the safety director of Parma to call the police chief and say, start allocating resources elsewhere because we are going to be requiring 2 officers on every prisoner transport, whether it's taking them off the streets of Parma or paying them overtime. And as Bob Reed had indicated, that was a priority that he created as a result of being a police chief and as the result of being a city manager, where he understood that by simply allocating 4 officers 5 days a week, he could drive a bus around Cuyahoga County and accomplish great things. And again, as I was safety director of the city of Parma, I was given 1 week notice, change your plans because we are changing ours. And I guess that goes to the point of why we're all here. Again, 3 times on my sheet, I wrote the word accountability. When that happened, I know I called Mike. And I said, Mike, they're eliminating I couldn't believe it. I said, they're not just eliminating mine, they're eliminating Strongsville's, they're eliminating Brooklyn's, they're eliminating everybody's pickup, Euclid's, and on and on. And there was little or nothing we could do. Called the sheriff's department. Their budget was cut. Much like everybody else's budget was cut. Much like my budget 2 years ago when I got to walk into my office and said, prepare your budget with a 5% decrease. And I took my $1.5 million decrease in my budget for 2 years. And then soon enough, money was allocated for compression increases for other employees, while my employees started $54,000 a year as prosecuting attorneys in the CFS division and my juvenile division. And I lose 11 CFS prosecutors in 6 months. There is no global, holistic look at how we operate this government. There are those who receive a lot, and much like the sheriff's department, those who receive a budget cut or receive a mandate you're taking Cleveland prisoners, or don't get enough nurses, or don't get enough medical staff. It has been a difficult 2.5 years as county prosecutor. I can tell you that. On both sides of my divisions, whether it's the criminal division, having to endure the beginning of the investigation, or my civil division, which is now under siege with federal lawsuits regarding the deplorable conditions in the county jail. You sit here today with a very, very big decision. You have heard from people who have been around a long time. People who've been with this government, you ask them around this building, people who've been here before and after. There's been some improvements. There's been many, many setbacks. You know, oftentimes I agree with the League of Women Voters. I really do. I really do. I respect their work. But if your first item is the lack of competitive elections, then we should do away with county executive. We should perhaps do away with many of the council seats. Maybe we should go to the form of a county manager. We have to look at the realities of what we are dealing with every day. And the reality is, again, somebody needs to be accountable. I spoke, Councilman Gallagher was there at a meeting. We were talking about, it was a meeting regarding perhaps a new county jail. This was about 2 months ago. And the last question they posed to all the participants was, what is it about this project that doesn't make you sleep at night? It came around to me, and my response was very simple and very clear. I'm afraid I'm going to wake up tomorrow and there's going to be another body in the county jail, a dead body, that we're going to try to have to understand and explain how it continues to happen time and time again. And no sooner did I say those words, within 2 weeks, we had an individual, again, commit suicide. An individual who unfortunately had told staff that he had thought about the same act several days before, and he wasn't screened, he wasn't isolated. Somebody needs to be held accountable. You're held accountable, I'm held accountable. We needed a sheriff with a direct line. I know that League of Women Voters said that their goal was to have clear lines of authority. I was sitting in the county prosecutor's office for the first, I couldn't tell what is the line of authority? Who's in control of the jail? I was told at one point Sheriff Pinckney didn't even have a key to the jail. Having an appointed sheriff, you know, oftentimes when acts happen, the pendulum swings very far. We had a terrible situation under the previous government, but the situation was about individuals. And those individuals went to prison. And the pendulum swung because of that situation. And sometimes when a pendulum swings, it swings a bit too far. And I think in this particular case, that pendulum did swing too far. We are the only county in Ohio that appoints a sheriff. We're the only county in Ohio who has the issues that we currently have. We've had a sheriff for 100+ years. It has taken a meager 8.5 years under this new form of government to reach this point. There's evidence as to what type of government and what type of sheriff we should have, and I think that evidence is overwhelming that this current form is just not working. And I don't know if it's going to take 20 bodies or 30 bodies or 40 bodies. What this decision is lying right here is to whether we're going to attempt to fix what I think is unfixable. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. O'Malley?
You know, Mr. O'Malley, I was in that room with you. There were 12 of us. There were representatives from the courts, the administration, the council, prosecutor's office, public defender, city of Cleveland. Of all those people that are in there to ask that question to, you and I were the ones that said, what keeps me up at night is the fact that the phone's going to ring and it's going to be another body.
You are correct.
And it chills me to even say that now. In a public meeting, it was almost like nobody gave a damn.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah. Thank you for that, Mr. Malley. I've enjoyed our conversation that we've had. I've learned quite a bit from you. When it comes to the sheriff, as you mentioned, all of these years and the great work, was it perfect though? Was there any challenges in all the years with the elected position?
I can tell you
I
this.
give credit to all that certainly is done and is true, but have there been any challenges?
You know, the best thing I can tell you is, like, as a county council person, I was a city of Cleveland councilman, and you know what? I hate to say this, for 6.5 years, I came into that body and I represented the Old Brooklyn area. As Councilwoman Conwell can tell you the amount of phone calls that Cleveland City Councilman gets, because she has to answer, I'm sure, for her husband. Or Dan was there. Dale was there. You are on the ground floor with the people. You are answerable. If you don't return phone calls, and I relay that to my office, if you don't return phone calls, it's a reflection of you. That's your standard basic job. You are accountable. The county sheriff, I can tell you, I experienced it the last year or so of McFall before he was indicted and removed. And then I experienced it for several years under Bob Reed. And to tell you, he was progressive, he was thoughtful, and as had been indicated, today Jerry McFall, who was simply a politician, he couldn't get elected to that position because you have to be a law enforcement officer to be elected county sheriff. That law was changed. So to talk about another Jerry McFall, that's not going to happen because you have to be a law enforcement officer. You have to have the training, you have to have understanding, and you have to have that mindset of right from wrong. Bob Reed came into that office with not just experience as a police officer and a police chief, but also as a city manager, an executive who operated a city and understood budgets and understood how to operate things. He came in, he worked diligently with his staff, and he quickly turned things around. Sadly, he was let go. I think if Bob Reed was, depending on how the budget cuts would have come in, that's part of the other issue we have to talk about. There needs to be impartial analysis of budgets. We're sticking to the sheriffs today, but you can't cut budgets to an entity that is responsible for people's lives without fully understanding the impacts, period. And so while you're talking about things, there's going to be a charter review commission. My opinion, there needs to be a charter review commission composed of appointees from various offices so you have a diverse view. Council should appoint people. I should appoint people. The county executive should appoint people. You can't have all the charter review members appointed by one entity, because you're going to get a group of people beholden to the people who appoint him.
I intuitively,
I know I went a little off,
continue.
but I can just tell you this. It's accountability, as Bob has indicated, but it's the independence to do what's right. It's the independence to say when somebody says we're taking Cleveland prisoners, to say we're not ready. It's the independence to say when somebody says you're taking a budget cut, to say we can't afford a budget cut. Somebody who can come up here and truly tell you what you need to hear, which is the facts, not distortions.
I intuitively agree with you. From the 11 years ago, I saw that when we came to this new government, there was efficiencies with managers, but I even saw then a greater level of independence was needed by many directors. So again, I'm still of the mind that I want to entertain and see if there's a way to improve what we have created here. But I know a change does have to be
And
made.
I would say,
and I'll ask
I respect that opinion, but I think you're dragging out the inevitable. And I have no doubt, I have my finger on the pulse of this community. This community made a decision that it wanted to start a new form of government. I voted for it. I supported it as well. But we can't have our heads in the sand and pretend what is occurring is not occurring, or a small fix is going to cure this problem. That office is responsible for the lives of thousands of people every day. They need the independence to operate it correctly, without fear of repercussion, without fear of anything from any individual. They need to be answerable to this body and to the voters.
There was one of our previous commenters made the comment that after all of the, I'm going to say, effective work, that they began to see themselves as a focal point. Take that however he meant it. But when you elect and then the people don't always know how to remove a person or remove those when there are issues. For example, you know the difference between a good judge and a bad judge. Would that be fair to say? You're part of the criminal justice system. You engage in a way that we don't.
I can
you
tell
can
you
make
that,
that yes or no. It's not.
I can tell you that we have many good judges.
Yes, we do have many good, but you know the difference. And you could sit down and show us in a quantifiable way. I know you can do that, but the people can't. They have not at all times in a perfect way been able to do that when it came time. And nothing more, no elected official, in my estimation, is more impactful in the life of any individual. Not this council. A judge can take your life. They can take your freedom, your marital assets. They can do things that, and we barely know who we are electing in that particular position. So I look at that and I have to weigh that as well when it comes time to whether we elect or whether if we can find a way that we can solve all the problems, being very honest and transparent about what has gone wrong with the effective leadership in this position, and take the time to determine if we can fix that and come up with something better than what we had before.
And I appreciate it, but again, I believe because of what occurred 10 years ago, the pendulum swung. It just swung a little too far. You'll never convince me of the logic that the executive should appoint the clerk of courts. Every municipal court either elects it or the judges appoint their clerk. I don't know what the executive knows about the courts, probably not as much as the judges. I just think there needs to be a really independent charter review to really review some of these issues where the pendulum swung too far.
I say what we put before the people, I believe the people will support. But I believe we have a responsibility to make sure that what we put before them is what we think is the best option for them to vote for.
I don't disagree, but we need to do it sooner than later. Thank you. Anyone else?
One of the things you spoke about just a few minutes ago was loss of life. One of the other things that we've noticed is there seems, from my perspective, there seems to be a culture of abuse that is taking place throughout the system. I relate most directly to the video where a middle-aged black woman was brought in and her violation was traffic-related and a disagreement with a family member. We are not told that it was domestic abuse of that family member, just that it was a disagreement. How the culture that the sheriff creates or allows to be permissible in the system, do you see that being changed by who the individual is in that leadership role, or is it who the warden is?
I think it all starts from the top. And unfortunately, in this particular case, the sheriff was not the top. And as Sheriff Reed indicated, when he came in, I know this, I know that he used to walk the halls of the county jail. He used to be in touch with the COs. He made his presence known to build those relationships, but also to scrutinize and discipline and hold those accountable who needed to be. What I have seen on video, to me, appears to be a culture somehow became that somehow these things were, at least amongst those people, permissible, or at least tolerated. And it's unfortunate because we see many of those videos. And I can think of a few others that I've seen recently where I just wondered to myself, where were their supervisors? I saw the one where the individual shut off his camera. And again, that's, to me, starts at the top. And it's having that military command that holds people accountable at every step, starting from their training to when they become a basic CO, and as they move their way up the ladder, that they are, and they understand that there's standards and there's behaviors that need to be met and that they will not be tolerated.
And you don't think that an appointed official can have the same perspective as an elected official on managing this
somehow in this
culture?
Well, I believe since an elected sheriff is the one who's truly held accountable. I mean, as I look today, given what has happened, who has been held accountable?
No one.
I mean, who's been held accountable? And the people who are doing the punching them, and they've been indicted, but who's ultimately been held accountable? I mean, we got 9 bodies. We have the decision to take on the Cleveland prisoners. We have the decision to cut the budget. We have an environment that has allowed those acts to occur. Who's been held accountable?
Well, just this week, the plain dealer held the 11 of us accountable.
I've read that. But I mean, as I was driving this morning, I had breakfast with the governor this morning, and and on my way back, I was thinking about what I would say here, and it all comes down to accountability. And as I sat there and I was driving for 2 hours, I thought, who's been held accountable? Somebody should be held accountable. I mean, and it starts, to me, with letting the voters make a decision. And we trusted them with the decision to go forward with this charter government. And I think they deserve the ability to decide if they want to amend that charter, whether the pendulum swung too far.
Thank you, sir. We have one more, and gentlemen, thank you for coming up here. I appreciate it.
But again, we have time constraints, and I know the president has said we can go beyond 5, but if we could get before 5, I'd appreciate it. We have an executive session. So if we could have Bob Conwell and the Muskingum County Sheriff Matthew Lutz present. And Sheriff, if you could identify the other county sheriffs that are here.
Well, I'll let Bob do the announcing. We do appreciate being up here, Chairman Gallagher.
Yes, we have Sheriff Travis Hutchinson from Wayne County, Sheriff Steve Berry from Summit County, Sheriff Todd Corbin from Huron County, Sheriff Scott Hildebrand from Geauga County, Sheriff Paul Sigsworth from Erie County, and another sheriff who was in attendance but had to leave, Keith Everhart from Hardin County on the far west side of the state.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Chairman Gallagher, President Drake, Brady, members of council, thank you for having us up here. The term office is defined as a major executive division of government, and I'm going to be not take as much time as the previous two speakers. It was very enlightening for me to listen, a very good experience, and they have a lot more experience up here than we do. And I will address just a couple comments. The word elected is defined as to select by vote for an office. Sheriff's office and elected carry the same importance to the citizens of Ohio. They have an opportunity to select an individual that is going to enforce all civil and criminal laws in your county, as well as who will provide for the incarceration of persons alleged or convicted of crimes against society. To defer this option to an individual that is appointed to oversee a department of county government is a disservice to the public. Accountability and responsibility must be open for public scrutiny. Therefore, we have the elected sheriff that answers to the people. The people provide the guidance to the office of sheriff through the election process. The office of sheriff is not another department of county government. Its internal operations are the sole responsibility of the elected county sheriff. Department heads, appointees, they are subordinate to a county administrator because they are truly a division of county government. Sheriffs possess great authority over the people of the county in criminal, civil, and correctional matters. This authority is balanced by the accountability in its purest form. The judgment of people every 4 years on election day determines whether or not the sheriff is doing a good job and should be retained. The sheriff, because of his status as the chief law enforcement officer of the county, is the central point whereby all law enforcement agencies are coordinated against unlawful activities. The sheriff is required by law to preserve the public peace and to bring to court any person that disrupts the public peace. 88 unique counties, 88 individual sheriffs, but all with one goal in mind: to serve our citizens. The Ohio sheriff has a role in criminal justice like no other law enforcement agency. The sheriff answers only to the citizens of his county. He does not report to any politician or any government agency, only the citizens. This is exactly why the office of sheriff is an elected office in 87 counties and should be here. Sheriffs in Ohio have a wide range of duties. The sheriffs of Ohio are the only full-service law enforcement agency in the state. We handle general patrol of the county, enforce traffic laws, investigate crashes, investigate property crimes, work drug investigations, covert operations, and work closely with other law enforcement agencies. Sheriffs also register sex offenders and ensure that you have the opportunity to be notified of sex offenders in your neighborhood. We are also called upon to register permit holders for carrying concealed weapons. Sheriffs also manage jails of all sizes, provide civil processing and security for the courts, as well as providing 911 dispatch services for law enforcement, fire, and EMS. As you can see, sheriffs play a critical role in the criminal justice system, from the initial investigation to pretrial detainment to trial security and ensuring witnesses appear, to carrying out justice by delivering those convicted to penal institutions. Your sheriff is involved every step of the way. The importance of an elected sheriff is that we always know who we work for and answer to: our citizens. We must never forget we are the citizens' voice in law enforcement, and we work for them, not a politician or a political party. Your sheriff is your voice in law enforcement. He is your friend, your neighbor, and is the only cop required to live in the jurisdiction he serves. His entire family has a stake in the community he serves. Don't ever forget, citizens are the sheriff's employer. No other law enforcement agency answers directly to the citizen. Some call that politics. We call that the American way. Just a few comments on some of the other information that I heard today. Sheriffs can have pressure put on them as well. We work closely with other elected officials, including commissioners. If a sheriff isn't doing their job, the commissioners control those budgets. They can put pressure, political pressure on us with our citizens. I've heard stuff about the previous administrations here as the sheriff who went the wrong way. It's true. We are human. Cops are human. They're going to make mistakes, as sheriffs are. We have 2 under investigation right now in the state of Ohio. However, they are under investigation. We self-police this, and I don't know right now of any sheriff that's currently serving that's been convicted of felonies. We've had some that's gone to jail, but it's been policed and it's been taken care of. There are ways to get sheriffs out of office that are not doing the job, and we've proven that. I also heard about experience. If you look back here, and I'll make fun of these guys, there's not too many young guys here, okay, including myself. 30 years in law enforcement. Most sheriffs, predominantly probably all sheriffs, have come up through the ranks. They know their office. They have that experience. Most times they're from their community, and people know who they are and what they're made of. We are the chief law enforcement officer of our county, and we are the only one to see the investigation from the start to the finish. So again, on behalf of my fellow sheriffs, I do appreciate you letting us come up here today. I'll turn it over to Mr. Cornwell if he has a few comments, and we'll be willing to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sheriff Lutz. Council members, I have provided you with some comments. This is a story that I wrote some 7 years ago for a magazine, talking about the appointment of sheriff versus the election of the sheriff, the department versus the office, something that I'm very passionate about. You know, I want to congratulate Mr. Stanton in his passion in his delivery. I too have that same passion for the office of sheriff. It needs to be elected in all 88 counties in Ohio, not just 87. So please, please endorse that concept.
Thank you, gentlemen, for coming up here. Are there questions for Mr. Lutz, or Sheriff Lutz, I'm sorry? Anyone else? Anything? Yes, ma'am.
Through the chair, during the transition of the charter and it being formulated, I'm assuming that your stances are that of today, that you believe that a sheriff should be elected. Did you reach out to the crafters or the various groups during the conversations in 2000? Well, we elected in 2009. They probably had conversations in 2008.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Conwell, as he said, those guys have been here for a while. Fortunately for me, I've been here 36 years in this job, so I probably can speak more directly to that. Yes, we did reach out to the then commissioners, the 3 did reach out and say that we endorse the concept of electing a sheriff, not having an appointed sheriff. We did not reach out to the crafters because they were not made known to us.
Thank you very much for coming up. Thank you. Greatly appreciate it. It's been helpful. Okay, we're going to hold this in committee until July 11th, when we'll discuss Mr. Tuma, his legislation. And again, I'll remind you, I hear there may be more. Please get it in. We do not have a lot of time, and I don't want to run through something. I want this well thought out. So a lot was said today, a lot of important things. I appreciate the pros and the cons, and we'll hear some more of that as we go. I'll now turn this over to Mr. Brady.
Thank you very much, Councilman Gallagher. We are at item 5 in the Committee of the Whole, and we are again going into executive session. And so all meetings of the Cuyahoga County Council are open to the public under the Ohio open meeting laws. Under that law, council may go into executive session during a meeting for authorized purposes. During executive session, council confers outside the hearing of the public. Council may not make any decisions about any matters in executive session. All decisions are made in public. This afternoon, the council's Committee of the Whole will go into executive session to discuss collective bargaining matters. During that time, our live stream will be down. We will ask all those not needed for the executive session to remain in council chambers. Council members will convene in the adjacent committee room A. Will re-enter the meeting once the executive session is ended. Is there a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing collective bargaining matters?
So move.
It's been moved and second. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Moving to executive session, Ms. Brown? Ms. Stevens? Ms. Simon? Ms. Simon stepped out at the moment. Ms. Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Tuma?
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher? Mr. Schron?
Yes.
Ms. Conwell? Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Council President Brady?
Yes.
And again, Ms. Simon, moving to executive session? Thank you. Motion carries.
All right, the ayes have it. We will adjourn the meeting for executive session.